This is Relationscapes, the podcast where we explore the stories and ideas that shape who we are and connect us with each other because it might help life suck just a little bit less. I'm journalist Blair Hodges, and our guide in this episode is National Book Award finalist Ingrid Rojas Contreras.
My mother kind of had brought me up saying, you don't tell anybody about this. You don't share that I'm a curandera. You don't tell anyone that your grandfather was a curandero. And when I told my mother that I wanted to tell this story, she was just very upset with me. And she said, if you do this, I will never speak to you again.
Some family stories are proudly passed along through the ages, while others are buried beneath layers of fear and shame. After moving to the United States, Ingrid Rojas Contreras kept quiet about her Colombian family's history of curanderismo, mystical powers, visions, and healing, until one day she forgot the secrets completely when a serious head injury triggered amnesia. As Ingrid's memories slowly resurfaced, she journeyed back to Colombia with her mother to exhume the remains of her grandfather, the man who had passed those secrets along, a man who, as legend has it, possessed the power to move clouds. On that trip, Ingrid unearthed more than bones. From the dust, she reconnected with a powerful lineage, both haunting and healing. And in spite of her mother's warnings, Ingrid tells the story in her memoir, The Man Who Could Move Clouds. She joins us to talk about it right now. Ingrid Rojas Contreras, welcome to Relationscapes.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
There are so many things I wanted to talk about in this incredible memoir. There are so many things we can't possibly get to. So I thought I would invite you at the beginning to just read from the beginning to set the stage for us. So this is just on page 1 and 2 to give people a sense of what your book is about.
They say the accident that left me with temporary amnesia is my inheritance. No house or piece of land or chest of letters, just a few weeks of oblivion. Mami had temporary amnesia as well, except where she was 8 years old, I was 23. Where she fell down an empty well, I crashed my bicycle into an opening car door. Where she nearly bled to death in Ocaña, Colombia, in darkness, 30 feet below the earth, I got to my feet seemingly unharmed and wandered around Chicago on a sunny winter afternoon. Where she didn't know who she was for 8 months, I couldn't remember who I was for 8 weeks. They say the amnesias were door to gifts we were supposed to have, which Mami's father, Nono, neglected to pass. Nono was a curandero. His gifts were instructions for talking to the dead, telling the future, healing the ill, and moving the clouds. We were a brown people, mestizo. European men had arrived on the continent and violated indigenous women, and that was our origin, neither native nor Spanish, but a wound. We called the gifts secrets. In the mountains of Santander, the fathers had passed the secrets to the sons, who passed the secrets to the sons, who passed the secrets to the sons. But none of his sons, Nono said, had the testículos required to be a real curandero. Only Mami, strong-willed, unafraid, more of a man than most men in his eyes, whom he liked to call mi animal de monte, could have housed the gifts. But Mami was a woman, and such things were forbidden. If a woman came to possess the secrets, it was said that misfortune would soon follow. Yet, as 8-year-old Mami recovered from her injuries after falling down the well, and as her memories returned, it so happened that from wherever her mind had gone, she brought back the ability to see ghosts and hear disembodied voices. The family says Mami was destined for the secrets, and since Nono couldn't teach them to her, the secrets had come directly to her. 4 decades later, when I suffered my accident and lost my memory, the family was thrilled. Tias poured drinks, told one another with an air of festivity, there it goes again, the snake biting its own tail. And then they waited to see how, exactly, the secrets would manifest in me.
Thank you. This is a book about these secrets, these abilities in your family. And you introduced us here to your grandfather, Nono, and your mother, who you call Mommy. And we're going to get to them in just a minute. But I wanted to start with your amnesia first. There are several places throughout this book where you add more details about what it was like to experience this amnesia that you had because of this bike accident. And the descriptions of it seem so incredible to me, where you're basically talking about experiencing the world being recreated right before your eyes. Like you didn't know anything all of a sudden. And you talk about, it's like you were seeing sunlight for the first time and you were seeing the world sort of recreate in front of your eyes. I can't imagine how that would be. So I just wanted to hear from you a little bit more about that experience of amnesia, which seems really scary, but you describe it as kind of a type of freedom.
Yeah, it was the most surreal, most beautiful experience of my life. There was a real tension between being on the edge of remembering something and then that something just remaining out of reach, forever. And, the most curious part to me was the moment that I realized that I couldn't figure out what had happened before the accident, and realizing that for me in that moment, the world started with being on the floor and hearing my head kind of like crack and then not knowing what had happened before that. And as you say, like instead of feeling fear, I just felt this immense sense of wonder. I remember just walking down the street and kind of thinking, wow, this is a street. Like there was a second lag where I would remember the word.
Yeah.
And sometimes I wouldn't remember the word. And that felt very poetic as well to me, that there was this space to invent, or there was this space where language hadn't been invented in a sense
and
yet.
You're a writer, so that must have been so incredible.
Yeah, it was really beautiful. And I think that there was, a sense of being present that it's hard to, even though I lived it, it's hard for me to recapture what that was now that I have my memory back. And I just, the feeling of not having memories at all meant that I didn't have thoughts to distract me from the present moment. So I was just continually in awe of the way that light was falling into a room and the way that roads kind of continue into the horizon, and just seeing people around and seeing all of these things around. And I had no intrusive memories or intrusive thoughts, or I didn't have any regrets. I didn't have anything to kind of weigh me down. And so I think that's why the experience felt so weightless and just so beautiful.
And you talk about that weightlessness, and then you write here a little bit later in the book that as your memory started to come back piece by piece, you say you started to grieve, and you say, the narrowing of a life is gravity. Memory is burden. I mourned every ounce of memory returned. And this is a memoir. This is a book about memory. And so in a sense, then I wondered if this is a book of grieving for you in a way.
I love that question. I hadn't thought of it in that language before, but I think you're right. I think that there, probably before I lost my memory, I, like everyone else, had all of these misconceptions of what that would be. As a writer, I kind of lived in terror of, for example, getting Alzheimer's and then not being able to write anymore. And, what would that mean? How would you live your life? And when I lost my memory, what I found was that it was a state of knowing that was completely apart and aside from our state of knowing that we know. And yeah, in some ways, you can't even compare it. But I did experience when memory went, that it was the most happy that I've ever been. And when memory returned, like experiencing, remembering certain things, or, sometimes I would go to sleep over the period of those 8 weeks and I would remember something. One time I woke up remembering the plot of Moby Dick, as something that I mentioned in the book. And I experienced that as a tragedy. I was very sad about, suddenly being made flesh and blood. Because before I felt that I was just so weightless and I was so a part of the world and so rooted in the present. And as the past came back, then it also meant that I became uprooted from the present. And in the way that we all are, just, began to be rooted in the past and just began to kind of feel all that weight of every decision that I've taken, everything that I've ever said, everything that I've lived, like all of it felt like it was just, taking residence in my body.
Mm. And you also talk about how, as memories about your family came back to you, your family's abilities, you talk about remembering that your mommy would hold your hand over a bowl of water and taught you how to bless it, and how there was a sense of secrecy and shame about it. Because as you mentioned in the opening reading there was this idea that women and girls weren't supposed to be engaging in these type of activities, like curandero activities. So healers, sort of mystical, prophetic type of abilities that your grandfather possessed. And so there was a shame connected with those things for you. And you say this experience of amnesia kind of took that shame away and made you start thinking about wanting to be more open about those things. And you say that made your mom furious when she heard about that. Talk about that fury.
Yeah. Well, and first I should say that from what I know, this is just my family. There are women curanderas all over South America, but in my family, for some reason, just my grandfather, his, grandfather before that, all the men said women are not supposed to practice. And in the book, I couldn't get, and in my research, I couldn't get to the bottom of where that came from. But as I remembered the stories of my family, I think that's the first time also that I started to fall in love with the world again. It was the first time, Moby Dick, the plot of Moby Dick, sure. But then, remembering that, the stories of, my aunts and uncles saying, like, we saw your grandfather move clouds, and then telling me about it, and meeting different people that my grandfather had healed in one way or another when I was a young girl. I remembered all those things, and I just started to really treasure those memories and really saw just how special that world was. And it was, it was almost like the most magical thing that happened to me was that the memory of shame didn't arrive immediately. So I didn't, at the moment when I was retrieving all that memory about my family, I didn't remember that my mother kind of had brought me up saying, you don't tell anybody about this. You don't share that I'm a curandera. You don't tell anyone that your grandfather was a curandero. And so those memories didn't come back, and all I felt was just a sense of pride. And when I told my mother that I wanted to tell this story, she was just very upset with me. And she said, if you do this, I will never speak to you again.
Yeah.
And she hung up on me. I called her back repeatedly. No answer. At some point, my dad answered, and he just said into the receiver, what have you done?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So
how did she end up changing her mind about it then? Because here the book is. And,
yeah. So in the end, what happened was my mother had a dream where my grandfather kind of gave his blessing in her dream. And my grandfather said that he wanted the story to be told. And so after that happened, and I had a dream concurrently about my grandfather kind of taking me by the hand and showing me through the house that they used to live in, Bucaramanga. And I just remember that dream so well. We were just kind of rushing through the house, and he took me to the back of the house, and he pointed to the river in the back, and he just said, like, this is the scene. And, and it's just like one of those dreams that was so, beautiful, and I felt like so held by it. And so once my mother kind of learned about those two dreams, she kind of went along with it. She never apologized for what she said to me.
I didn't get the sense that your mom would do that very often. Yeah.
No.
She's such a strong character.
She's a very strong character. But she did call me and she said, well, something has happened around this book that you want to write. And so we should go back to Colombia. And yeah.
Right. And that's what this book is really about, because dreams play a huge role. You've kind of introduced that idea here, family dreams. So your grandfather's dead at this point. Nono is dead, but he's coming to you and other members of your family with a really strange request. He's asking them to come get him and exhume his body, take him out of this grave. So let's talk about this man who could move clouds, who wants to be exhumed.
So he had been, I think, dead at that point by 27 years or so. And so or maybe 23 years. And so it's very strange that the dreams just kind of happened out of nowhere. But that was also part of I guess we had been dreaming about him, but all of that happened at the same time. And because two aunts and my mother all had that dream at the same time of my grandfather arriving to them and saying, I want my remains to be disinterred, that we just, gathered money. My mom and I bought tickets to go to Colombia, and we took the errand seriously. We were just like, it's happened 3 times. It's like a peer review of a dream. So
yeah,
we should go back and do that.
So this is the man who could move clouds. How did he get that name?
I think that's the way that most of my aunts and uncles spoke of him. Or when they told me, stories about him, that was always just one of the stories that for me was at the forefront. They just always said, did you know that your grandfather could do this? Even if they had told me this story countless times. My family is one that just loves to retell stories. And I just remember being asked that question. Did you know that your father could do this? Did I tell you about, when I saw this happen? And, he was a healer, and he had a healing room in their house where they all grew up. And so different people from the community would arrive there, and they would have a number of things that they wanted help with. And sometimes it would be, mental health problems. Other times it would be women who wanted to be pregnant and women who wanted to terminate their pregnancies. It could be broken bones. It could be epilepsy. It could be asthma. And he had a lot of plant knowledge. And so some of the healing would happen through that. And he also sometimes would heal through dreams. And so sometimes if, somebody would say, I have this, physical instability, my grandfather would sometimes say, like, yes, I will heal you in dreams. And that they would stay in his house, and he would feed them and give them different tinctures. And then at night, he would go to sleep and kind of concentrate on finding them in the dream world and then doing something in the dream world to kind of heal them. Sometimes there would be a clue in the dream that would direct him to an herb or would direct him to something. And so it's always been in a loop in my family. The dreams to reality loop is one that, happened over and over again.
And there's so many incredible stories of spirits and apparitions and foretelling the future and healings and sort of these miraculous things that seem commonplace in your story. But you also seem to be a person that's very attracted to proof and documentation. I mean, there's photos that you've taken throughout the book. You cite different documents that you looked at in preparing the book. And one of them is your grandfather's business card, Nono's business card. And I'll just read it here. Rafael Contreras Alfonso, homeopath, cures you of all kinds of illnesses, diabetes, obesity, sinusitis, cancer, and witchcraft. And then the last line on here you say always gets a laugh from you. It says, licensed by the Scientific Center, which you said wasn't actually a thing, right?
It's not a thing. I mean, I think the document itself tells a story. And I think that was one of the early documents that I saw that made me think that I wanted more documents in the story. I was also playing with the idea of memoir and, I think the rules that we have around memoir and what it's supposed to be. And I did want to play a little bit into that. When we went to disinter my grandfather, I took a Polaroid camera with me. And I wanted to document things that are hard to document. So anytime that somebody would tell me, I have an aunt who told me, I have been haunted by the same ghost since I was like a little girl. And she was like 70 at the time. And she was pointing to this place in the jungle where the ghost always appeared. And she was telling me, this is what he looks like. He always appears. He beckons me with a finger. And at that moment, there was like a ray of light that just fell on the jungle at that spot. And I just took my Polaroid and took a photo of it. And I think I was just trying to document things that felt surreal or like the ghostly. I was trying to make an archive of the ghostly through those images.
Yes. And I love that you never spell that out. You don't ever tell the reader that that's what you're trying to do. So it lets us live in your experience of documenting as you're experiencing it. So you're not like laying it out.
Yeah.
Again, this is part of the craft of memoir. It speaks to your skill as a writer.
Yeah, I think also I wanted the reader to be, lulled by the story in some ways and then be shocked by an image that kind of like reminds you that, no, this is actually... people are telling me these things and I'm there and I'm living it. And, this is what the grave looked like after we disinterred him. And this is that spot of sunlight. And this is, another kind of ghost related image.
Yeah, so we get to participate a little bit because I think a lot of readers are going to be skeptical of some of the more miraculous stories that appear here. And at least when it comes to your grandfather, also with his business card, adding that line about the scientific center kind of shows me that he understood showmanship as well. And you talk about a skull that he ended up putting into his healing room that I think a dentist or somebody had given him, saying like, hey, man, you need to like dress this place up, make it look a little bit more spooky. And you're going to like, you need to brand yourself a little more. So he had some like showmanship and stagecraft, but he also seemed to be a true believer in his abilities as well, right? So people want to know, like, was he a fraud? Is this stuff being a charlatan? And we do see him playing up some stuff, but it also comes across that he was a believer in this and truly believed that he was practicing in good faith.
Yeah, no, he was practicing in faith. I think the line about the scientific center is he's just trying to kind of get people who like wouldn't believe in him to like give them something to believe in him. And with the dentist story is just so funny to me, and I'm so happy that I put that down into the book. But I think it also speaks to the way that, in Colombia, in this area, in this part of the country, in many villages, there isn't quite of a stark line between a dentist and a curandero, say, like how we might have a very stark line in the United States. And that's just different culturally. So this dentist had gone through like a very bad heartbreak, and my grandfather had given him all of these plant tinctures and had kind of helped him get through that pain. And then after that, the dentist just became very involved with my grandfather's curandero business, and he wanted to help. And he was like, no, me, for example, I have diagrams of teeth on the wall.
Right.
So like, what is your equivalent? Like, what could you put on the wall? And it just all led to the dentist getting a skull from the dentist.
I couldn't believe this. It's like a real skull.
Brought him a skull back, and he was like, this is what other curanderos put. Like, don't you think that if you put a skull, then people will be like, oh, this guy really knows his stuff?
Yeah. And you remember seeing this skull, right? Like you saw... Did you see it as a child, or your mother did? I guess.
No, my mother did. Yeah.
Yes, your mother saw it as a child, so she was like.
I think by the time I was a child, the skull had disappeared mysteriously, and then in the book, I found out like how it reappeared mysteriously.
Oh, that story is so funny. I'm going to leave that one for like people that pick up the book, but you got to find out, folks, what happens to the skull. So that's a reason to pick up this book. It's called The Man Who Could Move Clouds. All right, so when we think about calling him the man who could move clouds, it seems really peaceful or helpful and kind of beautiful. But of course, clouds also can bring storms and a sense of the violence of weather. And your book doesn't shy away from talking about some of your grandfather's abuses and some of the violence that he participated in. For example, when it comes to your own mother, you say that she was his favorite child, but it wasn't always like that. In fact, you say when your mother was born, he actually tried to kill her. And you tell this story of violence, and it's a startling story.
Yeah, I think so at the time, I mean, it kind of goes back to his relationship with my grandmother, and he would just be constantly leaving on all of these long trips, and he would go on these trips to visit with other curanderos and other tribes, and then he would return. He was also visiting other women when he was kind of going away. So every time that he came back, my grandmother, as a way to try to keep him, is that she would try to get pregnant by him. And she was just kind of thinking, like, if I have another baby, like, this will make him stay. And instead, he would just constantly be leaving. And that was the dance that they were in for, 10 children. And so when my mother, he hadn't known about my mother, but at some point he was away, and then he says that he kind of heard a spirit tell him that there was like a baby coming and that this baby was evil. And so when he returned, he was just kind of convinced that he had to kill this baby. And then he drank a lot of alcohol, found my grandmother, and then was chasing her with a machete. My grandmother, thankfully got to hide with her own mother who lived across the street. And the next day, my grandfather said, like, he could, or the next day, no, like later that day, he said, like, he had lost kind of like his memory. And he said, like, I don't know what happened. And
yeah, it was like a fugue state,
it was a fugue state.
Yeah.
And so even if I, have been questioning my mother about this story constantly and constantly saying, like, but how do you feel about this? And like, do you think it's a fugue state? And she's always said, like, no, I think that he was possessed. And so she has kind of
She
like
interprets it
never
like that, yeah.
veered away from that. But I think that writing the story was just really a practice of trying to allow people to have their truth. As a storyteller, I can kind of tell it all and say what happened. And I can give you what the person believes, like what my mother believes happened in that state. And I think would be maybe like a violence on the story for me to then superimpose my own opinion of what I think happened. And I actually think my opinion is that I don't know what happened, but I think that also allows for the reader it just allows enough room for the reader to kind of make up their own mind about my grandfather and about, what happened. And I did want to give kind of like a full, portrait of him in so much of our culture and in so many of our stories, especially in memoir. There's always a practice of trying to protect men in the family, and there's always a practice to try to kind of, but sometimes when we do that, we don't realize that we're protecting abuse. And so it was important for me in this book to, not have silences around abuse, but to kind of, say them and speak them. And I think that there's a power to that.
And I think the power is also in not creating a supervillain either. I think some memoirs that really delve into the difficult parts kind of veer into making people out to be evil. And some people do horrible, terrible things, but they're kind of two-dimensional that way. With you, there's clear affection for your grandfather. We get to see what I presume to be maybe one of his worst moments of his life. But we also get to see other things that he did and beauty that he participated in. And so we get a fuller picture of him. And talking about these tough stories, you say that most families try to keep this stuff under wraps. Your family refers to them as ultratomb. And so like the super grave, like bury him super deep. But you say that your mom is a tumba abierta, like an open tomb, and you are as well. So bringing the difficult parts of the story out into the light, you certainly felt comfortable doing that. What about the extended family, your mom and others who see a story and like, oh, wow, you're depicting this moment of great violence? Is there a sense of embarrassment there? Did you worry about how your family would feel about that being a tumba abierta?
Yeah, I think we had conversations around that. I think in the end, there was a lot of conversations around, silence and what silences are we supposed to keep and what is silence protecting? And if silence is protecting abuse, then is that a silence that we want to keep? So yeah, I think those conversations are difficult. I think in the end, it is the decision of the person who's at the center of the story. So I don't think any of these stories, especially those, that involve my mother and my grandfather, are my stories. But I will always kind of side with the person who's at the center of, something happening to them. And if it's important for them to tell the story, then I think it's important for me to, tell that story with them or, tell it from their point of view. And I think it's, there's something very complicated about their relationship. But, like as my mother grew and, after her accident and after she lost her memory and, recovered it, my mother and grandfather were inseparable. And there was a humor about this incident, when she was a baby and, he tried to kill her. And she told me that she would bring it up every time that she wanted something. So she would try to use it against him.
Remember this?
So one time, so I was saying earlier, like he went on these trips and then he returned. And so he always returned with an animal that just my mother loved this part of his return. And one time he returned with a monkey and a parrot that could curse. And another time he brought back an anaconda. And so you see how he can be like a very, special man in another way, like just very kind of like, alive, like brings a lot of interesting things around him.
Yeah.
And so my mother would say like, oh yeah, first you try to kill me and now this. And what she wanted was that he bring her back a baby lion. So she was just like, bring me back a baby lion. Like you tried to kill me, like you owe this to me. And so, I think that the fact that she would bring it up constantly to him in this humorous way as a way to get what she wanted when what she wanted was so, over the top. Like she just wants a baby lion.
Yeah, it's like give me the world, Dad, kind of a thing.
Yeah. And so I think that also to me communicates that there was an understanding between them that, we weren't there for that. Like I don't know what that is, but I can see the outcome of it. I can see that they were very close and that they understood each other. And, I write a lot about the complications between patriarchal men in Colombia and like the violence that patriarchal men in Colombia have and the different ways that comes up. So it was also like, a loving relationship, but a relationship that was constantly complicated by patriarchal values that he didn't always realize he had.
Mm. And your book does a wonderful job of giving us context for that, depicting it with care and concern, but also, you don't pull punches in terms of how you feel about it. It's clear that you're uncomfortable with a lot of that patriarchal control and how that works out within your family. So readers can get a really good sense of the context, but also there's a strong voice there that's kind of helping walk us through it. So that it's helpful. I want to talk a little bit more about your mom right now. To me, she was the most striking person in all of your stories. I know the book is named after No. This is the man who moved clouds, but I did wonder sometimes if you thought maybe about naming it after her. And I did notice in your acknowledgments, you thank her directly. You say, thank you most of all to my mother who told me stories and in telling me stories taught me how to live. No isn't mentioned directly in your acknowledgments. I assume he would be included when you say thanks, family far and near. So that's what made me wonder,
Yeah, I think that she is the main protagonist in the book is what I would say. With the title, I was thinking of No as kind of like the origin point. Like he is the way that we understand, what it meant for my mother to become a curandera and what that means for migration. Do you know what I mean? Like it's, so I was thinking of origin in that way. But yeah, I think that my mother, to me, is like the central part of the story.
She is so fascinating. She, as a child of a curandero, saw him doing his practice and sort of learning about that, but also, again, told that this wasn't for girls. But she ended up developing these powers, and they were connected to her accident. She fell in a well. She was probably pushed into a well by some other kids that, kids sometimes do impulsive things, not realizing what the implications are. But it knocked her out, and she possibly could have even died down there. She lost her memory for 8 months. There's a really beautiful thing about the connection between her and her dad. Her dad was out in the field or, somewhere. I can't remember exactly where, but basically believed maybe he heard her calling for help. And he ran to this and found her in this well and got her out.
So yeah, nobody else kind of heard her. And I don't know that she could have been saying his name, but he somehow heard her and he just kind of heard, he almost describes it as like he heard it internally. Like he just heard her calling for him internally. And he just ran out and was just trying to find her. And eventually was kind of giving clues that she might have been playing around the well. And he just sort of knew she fell. she just sort of knew like she must have fallen down the well. And so he found her. He also knew how to set bones. So when he found her, she had like a dislocated shoulder, and he set the bone and then just carried her back home. And I think this is, astounding. Like he built a drip machine out of, cane, like the sugar cane kind of like tubing, and fed her homemade serums, and then with other plant medicine prepared things for the skin so that it wouldn't scar, and just basically cared for her, nursed her from she went into coma, nursed her from that back to health. And my mother doesn't really have scars on her face, which I find amazing. So I don't know what it was that he put on her face, but it was all broken. And, it was a very bad fall. Yeah. And my grandmother was constantly trying to get him to take her to the doctor. And my grandfather kept saying, no, they're gonna cut into her face, and then she's gonna have like surgeries, or she's gonna have like all of these scars, and I can do it in a different way.
And after this accident, she begins to manifest these powers you talk about. There's a section I thought would be great to hear you read from on page 77, where you're talking about, you're experiencing, after your accident, you would wake up in the night and kind of be back in an amnesia state. You would wake up and would have forgotten everything. And you'd have this nightmare that you were in bed with your brother really inappropriately, and you don't have a brother. So you were having this horrible nightmare. And so you connect this with kind of some of your mom's new powers that she experienced, and how her life changed after her accident. So if you could read that.
Okay.
So this is one of the powers was she could double. It was like she had clones. She could appear in two places at once, and people would witness this. And so that was one of her powers. So you're going to talk about this doubling that would happen.
Mummy's doubling was a worrying event we all lived with, but Mummy herself never expressed concern about having a splintered self. While I was growing up in Bogotá, it happened that every time Mummy grew intensely angry, feverish, or tired, Nona would call us from 251 miles away, in Cúcuta, to report that she had seen Mummy appear. In the house that Nono and Nona built with their own hands, Mummy would materialize, caressing the furniture, turning a corner, shuffling down a hall. For a long time, I thought Mummy's apparitions were just stories the family told. Then, when I was 13, I saw one of Mummy's clones. I was heading down the stairs to the first floor of our house in Bogotá when I saw her sitting at the dining room table, even though I knew full well she was upstairs in bed with a fever. "Mummy," I called from what I hoped was a safe distance. I lowered myself onto the stairs and spied through the white wooden balustrades. The apparition did not look up when I called to it, but continued to stare at the round glass table where Mummy's tarot cards, or the clone's tarot cards, I should say, were spread out in the shape of a star. Everything about the apparition was a faithful copy, down to the charms that hung from her hoop earrings, the right one a pyramid, the left a sphinx. The clone plucked a card from the tarot stack, turned it and placed it by the others she had uncovered, and jotted something down on a piece of paper. I ran away. In her bedroom, Mummy's brow was sweating. I shook her awake. "I just saw you, Mummy desdoblada. You were sitting at the dining table." Mummy, pale and slick, turned over and groaned. "Oh, let me sleep, please. Sometimes that happens to me. Can't you see that I'm sick?"
So now you are the one that's witnessing this supernatural thing. And I have to say, it was really pleasantly difficult to pin down exactly what you thought about these powers. I mean, at one point, you're asking your own dad if he believes in her powers. And he is kind of a skeptical guy. And he says he thinks it's actually possible. And your mouth drops open with shock, because up until then, he'd really encouraged you to think scientifically and was kind of dismissive of these. And so I'm watching you tell these stories, and I think a lot of readers are going to want to know, like, what does Ingrid really think? Like, is this possible for people to appear in two places at once and all of this? But you really kept us at a distance when it came to your exact beliefs about these things.
Well, I think probably that is my exact belief is the thing. I think that this is a book that is trying to write into the most unstable parts of perception. And, those moments where you think you saw something and you're not sure. And to me as a writer, that's very fascinating. And I've always been, I think, brought up to live with mystery as opposed to try to, dissect the mystery. And I think something is always lost when we try to dissect it and we try to pin it down, especially in the case where there is no answer, right? Like there is no answer to what happened. Like that is the reality. There is no way to say or to prove, like beyond the shadow of a doubt, did she actually appear? Or did I actually just see something because of suggestion? And so I think that I like to live in the unstable reality, actually. I like to be in that space where I am not sure and I don't know. And I do kind of love to hear other people's relationship to instability and what that means for them. And, when I have family members who are very sure, one way or another, and other family members, I think for whom it's not, either or, but more that the story is what's important. So it's more that what it means that she can appear that's important, or it's more kind of like what that creates that matters.
And you point out that there are different ways of understanding truth that we get from our surrounding culture. And there's an author's note at the beginning where you're talking about how this is a memoir of the ghostly, amnesia, hallucination, the historical specter of the past. And you say that it celebrates cultural understandings of truth that are at heart Colombian, and that the stories here are the true lived experience of the people who lived it and as you lived it. So you do spend some time then also throughout the book kind of talking about these different ways of understanding truth and how colonialization has tried to erase some of those traditional Colombian ways of understanding what truth is. So like the fact that your family might be like, the fact of whether she like somehow materially appears or not doesn't matter. What I'm interested in is this idea that she appears and what that means for us. And that would bug some people who have been so enculturated to want, quote, the facts.
Yeah.
Right. So it's also some like cultural differences, right?
Yeah. And I think that's important to point out, because if we just said that, for example, like indigenous people in Colombia, when they were, also trying to heal, that very similarly, they would, shamans would go into the dream world, and that's how they would find the plant medicine. And so if suddenly we say like this is an indigenous tradition, I think outsiders stop trying to colonize. Do you know what I mean? Like they're like, oh, this is separate cultural understanding. I get it. Like I don't have to disrespect whatever's happening. And so I think it's the, curanderismo and, some people in Colombia have that indigenous lineage. And it's been, intermixed with, all of the historically what's happened to us, like who we've married into and what we've been allowed to believe outwardly and not, and what has been able to survive and not. But it is kind of indigenously rooted. And so when we talk about like that connection to dreams and that connection to a reality that can't be pinned down, I think it's also important to say that we are not talking about Western culture, and we're not talking about, the scientific method. Like, yes, that's something that I love and something that I support. And I am kind of in both, in both cultures at this point. But for me, I think that, the way to live, in this world is to respect, wherever I see like the differences in cultures. I think that both can exist at the same time. I don't necessarily find a need in myself to make one lord over the other. And I don't know if people realize that when they want other people to make a decision, or to kind of, when other people want to impose, their culture over another, I don't know if they're seeing that that's what they're doing.
Right, because they're taking their own perspective for granted. That is the baseline. So,
right. I think often with Western ideas, it's like but that's the reality. Like that's the truth. Like we're not even seeing that it's that also the Western ideas is also a culture. That's also, its own culture. And it's not actually everybody's truth because, other people come from other stories and other origins and other ways of being and relating.
That's Ingrid Rojas Contreras. She was born and raised in Bogotá, Colombia. Wrote a novel called Fruit of the Drunken Tree that won all kinds of awards. It was a New York Times Editor's Choice book. She's also written essays and short stories in the New York Times Magazine and The Believer. She lives in California, and today we're talking about the book The Man Who Could Move Clouds. It's her fascinating, incredible memoir that is a National Book Award finalist and also a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. All right, Ingrid, let's go to the scene of your grandfather's grave, where your family does make it there to fulfill his wish that he's been delivering in dreams. And you described this scene in detail and include, as you said, Polaroid photos of some of his remains too. So I thought it would be powerful to hear you read from this. This is on page 94, and I'd like to have people experience this moment with you. So to set the scene, here you are at the site of the burial with your mom, your aunt, and a cousin.
It is so black I can't tell what anything is. The one gravedigger steps up to my right, clears his throat by my ear, says, "You could have died." Then he says for everyone to hear, "The casket has disintegrated. The corrosion is high. We'll have to pull the body out part by part." He steps back to fit one arm at a time into a yellow butcher's apron. I continue gazing down into the black. After a while, as my eyes adjust, I see pieces of a lilac ribbon. It amazes me how such color has survived, but it shouldn't. The ribbon is plastic. I blink. Suddenly, I spot the skull. Then, among the clumps of earth, I see white finger bones. Everything snaps into place. The finger bones are peeking out of a graying coat sleeve, and they are wrapping delicately around the base of a turquoise cross. Here and there, I can see the cloth of Nono's pants emerging from the dirt. The white finger bones holding the last movement of my grandfather's body feels like something I am not supposed to see, so I turn away and close my eyes. Tia Perla is standing next to me. She tells Fabian the cross they buried Nono with was bronze, and Fabian explains that it is blue now because it has oxidized. Notice all the things the cross has stained blue: Nono's chest, the coat sleeve, the earth. Mami is quiet too. Then I hear the sound of her camera shutter. The gravedigger wearing the yellow apron climbs back down into the hole, and the other two stay up top, receiving parts. There is a long steel tray for the remains lying on the grass. They transfer my grandfather to it in handfuls. The first things to be placed on the tray are small bones and more colored ribbons, but then it's small pieces of paper which get carried to the tray along with lumps of earth or cloth and unidentifiable matter. Mami and Tia Perla begin to count the papers. I know the papers are the requests people sneaked into Nono's casket the day of his burial, like the ones Tia Perla found half-planted in the grass atop Nono's grave after the shared dream. When a curandero dies, it is customary to leave him with encargos. The curandero will then carry his people's errands to the afterworld, where his powers are said to multiply. But in his last days, Nono said his powers were waning, his load was too heavy, and he took to drink. He had asked Mami to keep any and all requests and prayers away from his casket. But family members and strangers alike disguised the request behind flower arrangements and roses. The day of the burial, Mami and Tia Perla intercepted at least 40 requests. They repeatedly announced Nono's wishes to be left in peace. They grew furious, then dejected, and finally resigned themselves to people's disrespect. They supervised the long procession of mourners. At the time, Mami unfurled and read some of the prayers she had intercepted. She wanted to know what was being asked of her father. Of these, there are 3 that she remembers. Don Rafael Curandero of Ocaña, by this paper I hold you from your rest until you give me a house. Rafael Contreras, look over my children. They are in so much need. Rafael, by my will, you will dwell among the souls in purgatory until you grant me revenge. At the cemetery, I hover over the steel tray and look at the papers, wondering how many wishes were fulfilled. I have no way to find out. I had imagined I would be able to read them, but as I bend over them, I see that they have turned crinkly and black. There are at least 30 of them. The gravedigger in the yellow apron is crouching at the bottom of the tomb. He is looking at nothing, it seems, but then he sweeps aside dirt and pinches at 2 points. He pulls, and a light linen coat emerges. He places his hand beneath it, at the middle of its back, and as he does so, a matching pair of pants begins to surface. He pulls at this until he can slip his other hand beneath. I imagine he is trying to keep all the bones together. It is a logical, simple gesture, but I am shocked at how compressed Nono can be, leveled inside a coat and pants draped over this man's arms. The man in the grave swings his arms up to the man above ground, and they transfer Nono from one pair of arms to the other, because the suit is not a suit filled with bones, but to us and to them, for this brief moment, a person. The man above ground drapes the coat along the length of the tray, but the pants are loose and fold underneath. Nono is headless, just the linen suit he wore on his wedding day, dusted in decay. Then the skull is added, and as a finishing touch, the shoes, all the ingredients of humanity on a tray. After a while, the abuela says, "How black the skull is." "It's normal," Fabian answers. "It's the humidity." For the next 20 minutes, I don't know where the gravediggers go. I don't know what anyone is doing. All I am conscious of is that I am kneeling on the grass in front of my grandfather's bones, inhaling the scent of deep, dark earth that wafts of his remains. I am hearing all of the stories we told to me. I can almost hear his voice. His bones are a conjuring.
And then right then we get to see the actual photographs, and that really snaps us into the reality of the scene. You've described it so beautifully, but it still seems at such a distance. It seemed to me as I read it, I mean, I was completely spellbound by your description, but then seeing these photos, it's clearly photos that were taken in like 2012. Like these are people, this is like a real thing that just happened. And you've got a photo there of Nono. And I wondered about that decision to include photo of his remains. It seems so intimate.
Yeah. I think, one of the things that I felt was important for the book was this idea of unearthing. And to me, I know that we tend to be very queasy about many things, but one of them is we tend to be queasy around death. South Americans are very different around death, and we're not as queasy around it. And we have this relationship that's very kind of organic and, like Dia de los Muertos, right? Like you've seen people just be in touch with death in this other way that's, very kind of tactile, very participatory. Yeah. And so I think that one of the things that I really wanted was for Nono to be present in as many ways as he could be present there. And also because maybe I'm not as squeezy about it as other people might be.
For me, it was just, it seemed, I didn't feel queasy, but I did feel, it felt like for me, like a private thing in some ways. But that makes sense that there's more of, culturally, more of a communal connection and a sense of openness to interacting with the dead in ways that in my culture, I just haven't been exposed to that a lot. So that helps make a lot of sense of it. And it certainly brings the reality of the situation to the reader in a really strong way. They're beautiful pictures, even though they were taken by this Polaroid camera. And one of the things also, Ingrid, that your book makes clear is that different families can have some of the exact same experiences, but interpret them and understand them very differently. And we see this with your family. Some divisions crop up. There are religious divisions that happen. So some of your family sees what your grandfather was doing and rejects it. They see it as evil. They see what your mother would do as evil. They put crosses on the walls of an apartment in one part of the book to sort of maybe heal the place or send a message of repentance to people that would participate in what they saw to be sort of evil rituals. And so I wondered about those family divisions on a podcast like mine where we're exploring family. I think talking about these type of divides is really important. And your book spends a lot of time attending to some of those divisions within your own family.
Yeah. I think that those divisions allowed me to look at, why they would have happened or how they could have happened. And they allowed for me to look at the history. And, I just always kind of grew up we always kind of knew that there were missionaries around. And for the family that, came to believe that what Nono and Mami were doing was evil, they basically took that message from people who were evangelizing.
Yeah, this is like a charismatic Christian church, right?
Yeah.
That they ended up joining. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the family, the people who kind of joined the church started to kind of also have the same message as the church. So they started to say, the Bible says that doing this is evil. And it really kind of gave me an opportunity to look at how that has happened, on a large scale in the country in Colombia, because it's really the history of our colonization. When the Spaniards came and they converted as many people as they could to Catholicism, they used things like torture, and they used things like coercion, and they used things like this message of what you're doing is evil and, you're going to hell. There are people in Colombia who we live kind of syncretically. And so you kind of have your indigenous beliefs and you have your Catholic beliefs. And it doesn't mean that one is evil and the other is not. But it kind of means that there's two cultures that can, coexist and live together. So I think the part of the family who, this division was created around people who just couldn't get over that. They couldn't say like that it was okay, or that they couldn't say that this is, the idea is that even if they are indigenous traditions, that they are evil. And so it really is a narrative of colonization, has a long history, and then you see it happening in my family. Like you see people kind of saying the same things that have been, said for centuries. So I think in the book it just allowed me to see how it was happening in the micro scale, and also analyze how it's happened in the macro scale.
It also gets to your definition of family as well, because I'm going to leave it open to the listener as to what happens to Nono. So we'll kind of like, if people want to find out what happens after that, they'll need to check out the book. But once the mission is complete, before you leave Colombia, you and your mother travel around and meet a lot of different family members. And there's this sort of kin network that you start to get connected to. And so many of them would see you and in shock say, you look exactly like your mother. And they would feel this instant connection to you because of that. And you were just sort of being introduced to these people. But there seemed to be some love there and some connection there that was a sort of different type of family. So you have these family divisions where some religious beliefs have caused divisions, where some people might not talk to other people, or there might be hard feelings. But then you're also getting introduced to these broader networks of family on this trip with your mom. And it kind of led me to believe that you just have this expansive definition of what a family even is.
Yeah, I think that, especially, like as you were saying, like there's something about going back. When I go back to the village of Ocaña, where my family is from, where my mother's family is from, there's a sense that I can just walk around and sort of see my face all around the town. Do you know what I mean? Like you can just recognize your eyebrows, and you recognize you recognize your nose. Like you just
the shape
know
of your nose. Yeah, sure.
That you just belong there.
Wow.
And I also remember people that, for us to figure out how we were connected was too complicated. And we would start to do it, and they would say like, well, you're like, your uncle's cousin is my, and it would just kind of go, and then we're just like, we're family. It's,
Sure. And there's also the mystery of like Nono having perhaps had other kids and other
and we don't know.
Well.
Yeah, we don't know. But I think that there's maybe that's very different, especially if you live in a village where people are, know each other, and there are people who keep track of these very complicated histories and lineages, and they do understand, right? Whereas I was not able to understand a lot of the time. But it does kind of give you a sense that your family is very large, and that you're like, someone is always kind of looking out for you. And as I was walking with my mother, there was always someone who was coming to the street, and my mother would kind of try to explain who they are. And I would be like, okay, so like your second cousin of the uncle of the,
Yeah.
and then they would just kind of bring us into their home and they would just feed us and they would tell us stories and they would tell stories of, shared family members. And it was just this very lovely way in which history is being kept that I couldn't find, you can't find that history written down, but it's people are actually keeping it in memory, which I found is very lovely. And, when they meet you, they can sort of tell you stories about like these are the people that we have in common, and this is who they were, and like it's kind of like a living history book.
I love this part of the book because it seemed to me, we talked about memory being a grief in some ways. This seemed to be the emergence of memories that gave you a closer connection to a place where you had to leave. I mean, your book talks a lot about the violence and the civil wars that were happening in Colombia when you lived there, including kidnappings and attempted kidnappings of people in your family and you and trauma and violence that you witnessed. And, things ultimately got so bad that your family moved to Venezuela. And then you and your sister, Jimena, eventually moved to the United States. So when you're back there, back at your roots, you're able to kind of reconnect in a setting that's not violent. There doesn't seem to be a lot of fear there for you. So it seemed to me a good moment of healing, considering all the trauma that you and your family experienced, to the point of your sister Jimena being hospitalized because of an eating disorder, which is toward the end of the book. You talk about how difficult this was. She's treated at an inpatient program, and your mother actually comes to her side. So there's that healing that kind of happens where you're reconnecting with your roots, but you're also living out the result of coming out of violence at the same time. And that's, largely what brought you to the United States.
Yeah, I think that I was trying to write a book that's about how you carry stories and how different people carry histories. And so I was looking at, on a national level, what are stories or what are experiences that are being, erased, or that people are trying to erase, or the powers that be have tried to erase. And we can think of curanderismo in that way. Like when we say indigenous traditions are evil, like that's an effort to try to erase something. And it really is a triumph of, resistance to assimilation when that has survived and when that kind of still has a place in the world. And then there is this other way in which when you live through something that's very hard, you immediately try to forget it and you immediately try to erase that from your life in order to be lighter, in order to kind of be able to continue on. And so I was just looking at these two sides of erasure. And of course, it's impossible to try to erase something that happened to you. The more that you try to do that, the more that it's present, and maybe like the stronger that it gets for some reason. But yeah, I think in our family, we really, lived that through my sister and through just that time. There was a time when we just weren't sure if she was going to make it. And that was also, for me, writing the book was a really interesting part, because I could look at, my sister was in this inpatient program, and she was, of course, like being helped by Western medicine in that way. And then there were other things that my mother was trying to do, and how she was trying to communicate with this Western system in order to try to heal my sister was really fascinating to write into.
I loved seeing you work as a translator in this moment. It showed such care and love for your mom and respect for your culture. And this is you really bridging this sort of Western medical model with the curandismo? Is it curandismo?
Curanderismo.
Yeah, curanderismo, right. So, for example, here, this excerpt, you say you spent many hours translating Western medicine for your mom. You'd had an eating disorder, so you knew what the experience was like. And so your mom's like, what's going on here? And you could say, okay, it's a ghost she picked up, and I picked it up too when we flew over the border. Maybe it's a ghost that thrives in places of transition, and it can cast an impressive mirage, you told your mom. And you were thinking about body dysmorphia, how you and your sister may look in the mirror and see something, basically this eating disorders lead to this kind of thing, but you're able to translate it into this language. And I feel like both of these things have a truth to them. And your mom could then tap into what was happening and sort of understand it in her context, and then feel as though she could participate in the healing of your sister.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, like some of the words like trauma. We're talking about something that is felt, but you can't see it.
Yeah.
To me, like I just kind of like brought a poet's mind to that. And if I think about what my mom's knowledge is of like how to heal people, I can tell that would be her word for that would be ghost, I think that there is something, I've met many people who have come to my mother for healing. I think that there is something to those kind of illnesses that are very deep inside of us, that are just very hard to root out. And one of the ways in which my mother would try to help somebody, who's suffering from whether it's trauma or like depression or something really difficult that's like, very kind of rooted in you, she would, have like this glass of water and she would breathe prayers into this glass of water and then she would give it to the person. And there's this idea that you can ingest a prayer and that something that's like deeply buried inside of you that is very hard for other people to touch and is very hard for other people to kind of get there and try to help you with it. There's in some way, like I think that it does help to receive water, from someone and to, imagine, if you can't believe, but, like see that as a gesture of care. I think that does something. I think that changes something to be cared for in that manner.
And you also talk about how complicated the idea of healing could even be. And your mother was resistant to the idea of curses, for example. This idea that something was cursed and that's just how it was. And I really love this part where you say to your mother and Nono, you say, to Mommy and Nono, purity never came into healing because purity didn't exist. A person would always be visited by pain and grief. A person was an accretion, constantly growing in strangeness, becoming an accumulation. Healing was found in stretching toward abundance. It wasn't about leaving the past behind or dividing the self into good and bad, but about opening a path through ruins. So this is a healing that recognizes that not everything can be repaired. And it seems like I remember your mom's advice to you when you kind of dabbled a little bit in tarot reading and things, where she told you that a good curandera knows how to make space for people's burdens, but also knows never to pick it up, not to take it on like that. So there's a lot in here about healing.
Yeah, I always love that, what she said about opening a path through ruins. Maybe this is more the ableism in society that we think like if you have anxiety, then you're supposed to get better and never have anxiety again, and then you're normal, right? And now you've kind of been brought back to being normal. Whereas like this idea that if you have anxiety, maybe it's because you lived through something that's hard and that's just the consequence of living through something that's hard. And healing may not, the answer may not be in getting rid of it, but in learning how do you carry that, or how do you kind of develop a place where you can kind of be able to walk through it,
Yeah, to live with it as part of your life.
Yeah.
Rather than, you want to find a way for people to be able to heal from trauma in certain ways, but you also want to recognize, and here's the line right here, I'll just read it. You say, there's surviving, and then there's surviving the surviving. And those are two different things that suggest that, yes, you might have got through the hardest part, quote unquote, but that life can still be challenging. And now comes the task of surviving the fact that you survived.
Yeah. And I think that there's also a recognition that your life is beautiful in that,
in that brokenness. Yeah.
Yeah. In the brokenness, like you don't have to return to what you were, that it is kind of, beautiful that you survived something and that you're making space and you're, clearing a path through the ruins of that. Like there's something very beautiful about that. And there's something very kind of unjust or unfair to try to constantly say like we have to get to better. We have to get to what we were before, especially if that's impossible, if that can't happen, if that's for some reason out of reach. But yeah, I love this idea that Mami and Nono had about sometimes you are touched by life, and that is what life is, to be touched by life. And we don't get to say, whether it's going to be a touch that feels balanced to us or a touch that is going to feel, imbalanced to us. But that's becoming a person. And then there's a beauty in the accretion of whatever combination of things happen. It's all a beauty in that kind of becoming.
And it's real recognition that who we are is connected and made up of so many other people. We like to think of ourselves, or I do usually, as this individualized sort of person. I am this individual thing. But in reality, so much of who I am is made up with the people around me, the people who love me, the people who've raised me, the people who support me, and all the people I don't see that are helping make the food that I eat and build the roads that I drive on. And so it's a very interconnected view of what human identity is. And your family extends it into the afterlife as well, where someone like Nono can still be participating in the family and still have requests and still have needs and still be served by your family. And so it's a reciprocal relationship as well. Everybody's connected and everybody can give and receive. And it's really beautiful. We're talking about the book, The Man Who Could Move Clouds. It's by Ingrid Rojas Contreras. All right. Now is the segment of the show when we talk about regrets, challenges, and surprises. So anything that you regret about the book now that it's out, what was most challenging about writing this book? And then maybe if anything surprised you in the course of creating this book.
I don't know that I have regrets. I think that, challenges that I faced always had to do with how large the story felt.
Definitely.
Because I'm telling a story of a disinterment. It's also a story about two people having amnesia. It's also a story about, my grandfather being a curandero, my mother being a curandera. It's a story about migration and, trauma and violence. It felt very large as I was writing it. And I just throughout the whole writing of the book, I was just constantly trying to rein it all in. Wow. Because I just knew in my heart that it was a single story. And I imagine that other writers might have tried to, break it up into different stories, or maybe these are different books, or, however they would have approached it. But I just really saw it as this kind of epic. I just wanted to write this family epic that was 3 generations, that was just very complicated.
It is so epic. It is. I felt so connected to your family and the stories that you were telling that the scope of it never, to me, felt overwhelming.
Yeah, it was something that I was constantly worried about and constantly trying to correct and edit. And yeah, I'm just really glad that it that it came together.
So good. Okay, well, thank you for that. Okay, this is actually going to be a mini spoiler section before we go. So anybody who hasn't read the book yet and doesn't like spoilers, I suggest you skip to the end of this episode or turn it off now, because I'm going to ask a kind of like where are they now moment, because I did want to find out how your mother is doing and how your sister is doing. We end the book with you all kind of helping each other out. So I wondered, how's your mom doing? How's your sister doing?
My mom is doing well. She lives in Mexico City with my dad, and yeah, she's really happy. My sister has 2 daughters now. She's been like the strongest, like the most healthy that I've ever seen her. So everyone is doing really well.
That's so good. And I assume both of them have read the book by now?
My mom doesn't like reading, so she hasn't read it yet.
Oh, I kind of love that about her.
Yeah. She has that personality. But she knows what's in it, and she's, when I call her, the book is always on the center table in their living room. So I know she's very proud of it, and she's always showing other people, and she's always giving the book to other people to read. But she doesn't like reading. She just doesn't.
She
like
lived
reading.
it. How about your sister? Did she read it?
Yeah, my sister has read it, and she's read part of it before it came out. So she had also read it.
Cool. Okay, good. Yeah. I wanted to ask that at the end because I think there's some tension in the plot. Like we don't exactly know where folks are going to end up exactly. So I didn't want to. by asking that question, it answers a few of the questions I had as I was reading, like, what's going to happen? So, I didn't want to spoil. Okay. Well, Ingrid, again, I just want to say this book that you've written it's really a special book, The Man Who Could Move Clouds. Being a finalist for the National Book Award, being a Pulitzer Prize finalist, it certainly deserves that recognition. And
Thank you.
I'm so glad that you published it and that I had the privilege of reading it and then getting to talk to you about it. It's a real treat.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. That means so much to me. And I loved having this conversation. This was such a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Relationscapes, where we're mapping the stories and ideas that shape who we are and connect us with each other to build a better world. And there's more to come on the show soon. I'm inviting you right now, as always, to review the show in Apple Podcasts or rate it in Spotify. It's a big deal. I love seeing reviews come in, like this one from Rad Bookworm. They said that they love the thought-provoking and interesting conversations. Thank you so much, Rad Bookworm, and I love your Rad screen name. That's awesome. Maids of State provided our theme song. Relationscapes is part of the Dialogue Podcast Network. I'm journalist Blair Hodges in Salt Lake City, and I'll see you again very soon.